Hello and welcome to another edition of Ask the Economist. Today we're going to talk about what Canada should do about its own emissions of greenhouse gases. This is part of a series looking at the issue of man-made global warming, in which we're trying to keep our cool and remain analytic on a subject that's seen far too much shouting and sneering and far too little honest discussion of questions that are far less settled than some people would have you believe. And in an earlier installment, we talked about the idea that, first of all, we need to do something about human emissions of greenhouse gases, and secondly, that we need to do something about Canada's emissions. And we said these are two fairly big ifs, but we put them aside because there were other things to talk about. We have now discussed this question of man's contribution overall, because humans emit a surprisingly small amount of the carbon dioxide that is given off and absorbed every year. And we talked about why some people think that, nevertheless, the human contribution has alarming qualities that the natural one doesn't. Now we get to the question of what to do about Canada's emissions. Because just as humans contribute only, well, maybe 5% of the total carbon dioxide that's given off every year by the oceans, by plants, by all the natural processes, it's also true that Canada gives off a very small proportion of all the emissions that humans account for. You see figures around 2%, 1.6%, as China and India are building more and more coal-fired power plants. Our contribution actually gets smaller. And so some people say, oh, well, we shouldn't do anything. And I say, I'm trying to slice this thing into appropriate, manageable pieces. And so let's address this question. Suppose you believe the crisis is real, that human activity is rendering the Earth uninhabitable, or at least very difficult to inhabit for human beings and a number of other species. And you think we've got to do something. And they say, okay, but Canada's not actually contributing too much to the problem. So really, maybe we shouldn't do anything. It could be costly, carbon taxes, they could hurt the economy, they could harm jobs, and even if we cut our contributions in half, we would reduce the human contribution by 0.8% and the natural one by 0.16%. That's not going to change anything, is it? This is actually an example of a common problem in economics, the so-called free rider problem, and it arises in all sorts of areas. Famously national defense. Suppose the country's being attacked and we've got to go to war, we've got to stop the invasion. Well, if you could somehow sit it out while everybody else goes and risks getting killed, you get all the benefits if you win the war. You're no worse off if you lose it, but you're not going to get killed. Unfortunately, if everybody acts on that thought process, the country won't be defended and everybody will be worse off. And that's one of the critical reasons why we have government, is to solve these kind of collective action problems. And pollution's another one. There are certain kinds of pollution that you can very easily just use property rights to bring home to the polluter. For instance, if the water in a river is owned by the people who own the land on the shore and somebody dumps gunk into the river upstream, they can be sued. There are actually property mechanisms that can deal with a lot of this, but it's rather hard to deal with the environment, with the atmosphere. And it's hard to deal with countries that don't have good environmental laws. You get the idea, we've got to have collective action here. So then the question becomes, should Canada do something? Because one of the mechanisms that overcomes a lot of free rider problems, it's just kind of a social mechanism rather than a legal one, is honor. People just don't litter because it's disgusting to litter. And if everybody thought it was disgusting to litter, you wouldn't need stern laws and strict enforcement. There just wouldn't be litter. I'm a skeptic on global warming for reasons I've outlined elsewhere in the series and for reasons I will return to. But if you think the crisis is real, if you think humans are causing disruption to the climate, then yes, Canada does need to do it. We need to do it partly because we can't go and ask other nations to do it if we're not. That's just brazen hypocrisy. And you go to the Chinese or the Indians and you say, you need to do something because you're emitting a lot, we don't because we're just, emitting a little bit. They'll say, oh, you're rich. You're a rich country, you're not willing to do anything. You're asking us to starve our people. And they don't have electricity. They burn dung for fuel. They're breathing in particles. They get smoke in their eyes. It's really bad for their health. You live in clean, well-lit, warm houses, even though you live in a cold place, and you tell us to do something that you won't. No, we cannot do that. We must lead by example as a moral matter and in order to be persuasive. Now, as I said, I'm a skeptic of global warming. I don't think the problem is real. The Earth's climate is changing. It may even be changing in troubling ways, but I don't believe that we are contributing significantly to it. But anybody who buys the main argument, says, oh yes, I believe in man-made global warming. I believe that humans are doing things that is causing the Earth to get hotter, and the result of this will be disaster, and then say, but we shouldn't do anything. That is a nonsensical position. And to say, oh well, It is happening, and we should do something, but Canada should just sit it out. We should free ride like we do in NATO. Somebody else will pick it up. That's dishonorable, and it's also not going to work in practice. So I come back to a point I've made before. It is no use rallying people around the white flag. If the crisis is real, humans must act, and if humans must act, Canadians must act. If you're going to oppose heavy carbon taxes in Canada or cap and trade, all these other regulations, you have to dispute the notion that humans are causing the climate to be disrupted in ways that are harmful. There is no other sane basis for opposing carbon taxes. So we either lead by example or in cutting our carbon emissions, or we lead by example in saying that the crisis is not real, that Al Gore is wrong, that David Suzuki is wrong, that almost all governments are wrong, that there really is a lively scientific debate and the skeptics have the better of it. That's my position. That's why I don't want us imposing carbon taxes. But you can't accept the alarmist argument and then reject their prescriptions. So let's have a reasonable discussion in which consequences follow logically from premises. Either we deal with the crisis because it is real, or we don't deal with it because it's not real.